everybody, this is Jonathan Michaud from Gravitee. We just released Gravitee 4.6, and in this video I'm going to talk about one of the highlights of the release, which is to be able to manage Kafka native APIs with the Gravitee Kubernetes Operator. So for those that don't know, the Gravitee Kubernetes Operator is our operator which allows you to do GitOps style workflows with Gravitee API management. And with the 4.6 release, we've GA'd the ability to create Kafka native APIs, which means you can expose Kafka natively to Kafka consumers and producers while proxying a Kafka cluster upstream. And you can apply the same API management principles, the same types of policies and plans and monitoring and documentation and all that kind of thing that you get with classic synchronous REST APIs. So what I'm going to show in this video is how GKO now supports this new API type. I'm not going to get into the details of how the Kafka gateway itself works. You'll learn about that in some other content that we'll be publishing. So just a very quick example of how this works. So I'm here in Gravitee API management looking for APIs labeled with Kafka, and I see that I have none available yet. So I have an installation of Gravitee here that's running, and there's also a Kafka broker running on the same environment, and there's also a Gravitee gateway running on the same environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an API using the Kubernetes operator, but it's going to be a special Kafka API. So let's have a look at this API definition here. So we're going to use our usual Gravitee API v4 definition, custom resource definition. So this is the way that we define v4 APIs in Gravitee using the Kubernetes operator. This YAML manifest contains everything you need to be able to define an API. You'll see that we've got a name here that will be used to reference the API in Kubernetes, a reference to a management context, which basically points the operator to an installation of Gravitee API management. Name, a description, version, and here you can see the type is set to native. So this is the new type of API that we now support, which is called native, which is exposing Kafka to Kafka. You can see that I've defined the API needs to be started. I've given it a label, which is Kafka. Now the listeners are the ways that you basically expose your API to the outside world, and you can see here the listener type is Kafka. So I'm exposing the native Kafka protocol on a given host and port. And on the endpoint side, so the backend service that I'm proxying, you can see here that I'm pointing towards a Kubernetes cluster. The Bootstrap service is represented here. And then I also have a plan defined in here. I've got a keyless plan, which means this API will be freely consumable by anybody. So to create this API now, I have my local Kubernetes cluster here running on my machine with Minikube, and all I need to do is kubectl apply this manifest, and the operator will now basically call the Gravitee management API and instantiate this API. So if I head back now to the console and I refresh the view, you'll see I now have a new API here, which is managed by the Kubernetes operator. You can see the type is Kafka. The access here is actually a host and port on which we're exposing the native Kafka protocol. And you can see that this API is managed by the Kubernetes operator. So if I open the API and look into it, you'll see everything is read-only. The source of truth for this Kafka native API is the operator, and might even be your version control system if you're doing GitOps with a tool like Argo CD or Flux CD. And you can see the endpoints are defined here, etc. So basically here we go now. I've created my first Kafka native API using the operator. Now I can actually go ahead and consume it just to show you that this is actually working. So I'll head over to my terminal here, and I have on one side, I'm going to start a Kafka producer using the Kafka CLI. And on the other side, I'm going to create a consumer. And you can see that they're both talking to a topic here called ACR simple. And I'm basically the Bootstrap server I'm connecting to is the Gravitee gateway, which is exposing this Kafka native API. So now I can go ahead and send a message here saying, hello, Gravitee Kafka gateway. And it comes back out to the consumer. So basically through the Gravitee gateway, I'm now producing Kafka messages and consuming them back through a consumer. And this API definition has been defined using GitOps using the Gravitee Kubernetes operator. I can go ahead now and delete this API, kubectl delete. And now obviously we would expect that my producers and consumers are going to be broken because this API has now been destroyed. You can see that is not succeeding. If you look over here, you'll see my Kafka UI that I'm using to manage this cluster. And if I refresh the view here of messages, you can see that I've got one message here that came through, which is hello Kafka gateway, whereas that second message that I sent after having turned off the API, deleted the API, is not visible here. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching and enjoy.